Sarah knew something was wrong long before the words were spoken. It wasn't anything dramatic, just the subtle shift in how David looked at her. After 15 years of marriage, you develop a sixth sense for these things. That Tuesday morning, she stood at the kitchen counter stirring her coffee, watching him scroll through his phone with that small smile that used to be reserved for her. He hadn't kissed her good morning in weeks. Their spacious suburban kitchen, once filled with laughter and weekend pancake battles, now felt like a waiting room where two strangers avoided eye contact. She took a sip of her coffee, noticing how he angled his phone away when she approached. 43 years old, and she could feel herself becoming invisible to him, a ghost in her own home. She didn't say anything. Some instincts you learn to trust, and some truths you aren't ready to face. So she smiled that morning, passed him his travel mug, and watched him leave for work. Only when the door closed did she allow herself to rest her forehead against the cool refrigerator door. "You can feel when someone's already gone," she whispered to herself, "even when they're still in the room." The evidence accumulated slowly, like dust on a bookshelf. David's late nights at the office, the new cologne, the password on his phone that hadn't existed before. Sarah wasn't naive, but part of her desperately wanted to be. One evening, while he showered, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. She hadn't meant to look, hadn't been that wife who snoops. But the preview notification was impossible to miss. "Thinking about last night. Can't wait to feel you again." The message was from someone named Alex. Sarah's hand trembled as she set the phone down. When David emerged from the shower, she watched him laugh at something on his screen, his face illuminated by a joy she no longer inspired. She prepared dinner in silence, the knife against the cutting board the only sound between them. They ate without really talking, the television filling their empty conversation with meaningless noise. Later that night, she lay awake beside him, studying the profile of the man she'd shared her life with, wondering when exactly he had become a stranger. There were no dramatic fights, no plate-throwing confrontations, just the deafening silence of a love that had stopped speaking. It wasn't a scream, she thought as she turned away from him. It was the silence that screamed. Sarah began to watch David with detached curiosity, like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. He developed new habits, suddenly interested in fitness, buying new clothes, constantly working late. She noted each change with clinical precision, building a case file in her mind while outwardly maintaining their routine. Friday night dinners she now prepared for one. Sunday morning coffees on the porch alone with her thoughts. She'd set the table for two, knowing he'd text at the last minute with another excuse. When he did come home, he moved around her like they were performers in a carefully choreographed dance, close enough to maintain the illusion of intimacy but never actually touching. On their anniversary, she made reservations at the restaurant where he had proposed. He called 2 hours before, voice carefully modulated to sound disappointed. "Emergency at work, don't wait up." She went anyway, sat alone at the table for two, ordered a bottle of wine. The waiter gave her pitying looks. Sarah smiled politely, tipped generously, and walked home through city streets sparkling with other people's happiness. At home, she kicked off her heels, poured another glass, and scrolled through photos of their earlier years, laughing on beaches, kissing under fireworks, building the life she thought they'd share forever. She didn't cry. Not yet. Loyalty is quiet, she thought, running her finger over his smiling face on the screen. So is betrayal. The revelation came unexpectedly on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Sarah had come home early with a migraine to find David's car in the driveway. Strange, he should have been at work. The house was quiet as she entered, but she heard muffled sounds from upstairs. Something deep in her chest tightened. She knew before she knew. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her up the staircase that suddenly seemed miles long. Their bedroom door was ajar. She didn't make a sound as she looked inside. David and a woman, young, blonde, beautiful in that effortless way that Sarah had stopped being somewhere in her 40s. They didn't notice her standing there, watching the destruction of 15 years. Sarah didn't scream or burst into the room. Instead, she quietly stepped back, descended the stairs, and left the house. She drove to a park where they used to have picnics when they were first married and sat on a bench for hours, watching families and couples walk by. The sun set. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from David. He must have realized she'd seen them. She finally looked at the messages. "We need to talk. It just happened. I'm sorry." No, he wasn't. Sorry meant you wouldn't do it again. Sorry meant regret. His messages held only the inconvenience of being caught. Proof doesn't need volume, she thought as she finally turned toward home. Just clarity. The confrontation was anticlimactic. David sat at their kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Sarah stood by the counter, arms crossed, a physical barrier between them. "How long?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "A few months," he admitted, unable to meet her eyes. "She's 28. Works in marketing." Sarah nodded, absorbing the detail like a punch to the stomach. 28. 15 years younger than her. "Do you love her?" The question surprised them both. David shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. Maybe. It just happened. Just happened." As if an affair were a weather event, an act of God beyond human control. "Nothing just happens, David." The silence stretched between them, years of unspoken words filling the space. Finally he spoke. "I've already packed some things. I'll get the rest later." He'd been planning this. While she'd been in denial, he'd been organizing his escape. "I never wanted to hurt you," he added, the obligatory line from every cheater's script. Sarah looked at this man, this stranger wearing her husband's face, and felt oddly calm. No tears came. No screaming or begging. She simply nodded. "Take your things and go." After he left, she walked through their home, touching photographs, furniture they'd chosen together, the life they'd built. She removed her wedding ring, letting it drop into the kitchen garbage disposal with a small metallic sound. "Some things don't break," she whispered as she turned the switch, listening to the grinding finality. "They shatter, clean and cold." In the days that followed, Sarah moved through their house, now just her house, like a curator in a museum of failed love. Friends called, offering sympathy and girls' nights out, but she declined. Her mother suggested therapy, her sister recommended revenge dating. Sarah thanked them politely and disconnected. She didn't want distraction, she wanted clarity. Each room held memories she cataloged and filed away, the living room where they danced after buying the house, the dining room where they'd hosted Thanksgiving, the bedroom where love had died long before she'd noticed. She took methodical inventory of their life together, not just emotionally but financially. Spreadsheets replaced tearful journals. Bank statements substituted for ice cream binges. She discovered David had been moving money around, preparing for his new life while dismantling their old one. Fortunately, she'd maintained her career throughout their marriage, despite his subtle discouragements when promotion opportunities required more of her time. Now, reviewing their assets, she realized she wasn't financially devastated. In fact, with the divorce settlement, she'd have a substantial sum. One night, sorting through papers in their home office, she found printed emails between David and his realtor. Apparently, he and his girlfriend Alexis, not Alex, were looking for a fresh start in a luxury rental property. Sarah saved the email, a plan beginning to form. She opened her laptop and began researching investment properties. "Grief doesn't always look like sobbing," she told her reflection in the computer screen. "Sometimes it looks like a spreadsheet. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising efficiency. David was eager to start his new life and didn't fight over assets, a gesture he clearly thought made him magnanimous. Sarah's lawyer, a shark-like woman in her 60s who specialized in divorcing unfaithful husbands, ensured she received everything she was entitled to and then some. "Men like your ex always underestimate women like you," her lawyer observed during their final meeting. "They think emotional means irrational. Use that." And Sarah did. She accepted David's first settlement offer with just enough reluctance to make him feel he'd won, when in reality it was exactly what her lawyer had suggested they aim for. The settlement gave her liquidity she hadn't had in years. Combined with her savings and investments, Sarah found herself with significant capital. She arranged a meeting with a real estate agent, a sharp-eyed woman named Renee who specialized in investment properties. "I'm looking for something specific," Sarah explained, pushing a folder across the table. Inside was the address of the property David had mentioned in his emails, a historic Victorian converted to luxury apartments in one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods. Renee raised an eyebrow. "That's not currently on the market." Sarah smiled. "Everything has a price. Find out what it would take." As she drove home, she felt something unfamiliar, not happiness exactly, but purpose. For months, she'd been reacting to David's choices. Now she was making her own. He left with his heart, she thought, watching the city skyline grow larger in her windshield. "I kept the assets." Renee called 3 days later with surprising news. The Victorian property wasn't just available, it was potentially perfect. The elderly couple who owned it had been considering selling but hadn't listed it yet. Their son managed the property but was moving across the country, and they were hesitant to deal with tenants in their 80s. "They're asking above market, but not unreasonably so," Renee explained. "They've had the same tenants for years, for units, all occupied, all with existing leases that would transfer to you." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Can you get me the details of the current tenants?" The information arrived that evening. Sarah scrolled through the document until she found what she was looking for. Unit 3, recently leased to David Mitchell and Alexis Kendall. 6-month lease with option to extend. Just moved in 3 weeks ago. The universe had a sense of humor after all. She read through their rental application, noting their combined income, the references, the eager way they described themselves as professionals seeking a quiet, upscale living environment. They'd signed a lease well within their means, if there were 2 stable incomes. But Sarah knew David's spending habits, his tendency to stretch financially, his assumption that he could always earn more later. She looked up photos of the property online: tall windows, original hardwood floors, modern renovations preserving historic charm. The perfect love nest for a middle-aged man and his younger girlfriend. "I didn't chase him," Sarah murmured, reaching for her phone to call Renee. "I bought the finish line." Sarah moved with decisive efficiency. She offered cash, slightly above asking price, with a quick closing and the simplest terms. She would honor all existing leases, and the elderly couple could leave the property management headaches behind. Her financial advisor warned against putting so much capital into a single investment, but Sarah was beyond caution. This wasn't about sound financial planning. It was about reclaiming control. She created an LLC to purchase the property, ensuring her name appeared nowhere in the paperwork. The previous owner's son agreed to stay on as the visible property manager for a generous fee and complete discretion. "The tenants never need to know there's a new owner," Sarah instructed him. "Nothing changes for now." She signed the closing documents on a rainy Tuesday, feeling the weight of the pen in her hand as she claimed ownership of the building where her ex-husband now played house with his girlfriend. That evening, she drove past the Victorian, watching lights come on in the windows as evening approached. She could see David's silhouette in Unit 3 moving around what appeared to be the kitchen. For a moment, she felt a pang of something, not regret exactly, but recognition of everything that had broken between them. Then she drove away, her name on the deed to his new beginning. Vengeance doesn't need to be loud, she reminded herself. It just needs to be legal. For 3 months, Sarah watched and waited. She visited the property occasionally, introducing herself to the other tenants as a friend of the manager, getting a feel for the building and its rhythms. From her casual conversations, she learned that David and Alexis were already showing signs of strain. They'd argued loudly about money several times. The neighbor below them mentioned that the young blonde woman stomps around like she's angry all the time. Sarah nodded sympathetically while filing away each detail. Their 6-month lease would be up for renewal soon. She consulted with a real estate attorney about how much she could legally increase the rent. In this neighborhood, with these market conditions, you could go up significantly, he advised. Though such a large increase might drive tenants away. Sarah smiled. Just one particular tenant. She instructed the property manager to send renewal notices to all units. 3 would receive modest, reasonable increases. Unit 3 would receive a renewal offer at exactly triple the current rate, effective in 30 days, take it or leave it. The letter would come from the management company, with no indication of the property's new ownership. When the manager hesitated, concerned about losing tenants, Sarah increased his monthly fee. Some will stay, some will go, she said with casual confidence. That's business. She had the renewal letters delivered by courier on a Friday afternoon, knowing David and Alexis would have the entire weekend to absorb the shock. Let them feel the pressure I carried in my chest, she thought, imagining their reaction. Every day, David called the property manager within hours of receiving the renewal notice. Sarah knew because she'd instructed the manager to record all communications about Unit 3 and forward them to her. She listened to the voicemail while having dinner alone in her kitchen. This has to be a mistake. You've tripled our rent with no warning. We signed a 6-month lease with the understanding that renewal would be at market rate. Please call me immediately. His voice had that familiar edge, the one he used when dealing with service people who weren't meeting his expectations. The property manager, following Sarah's instructions, didn't call back until Monday, and then only to confirm that the new rate was correct, non-negotiable, and due to significant increases in property taxes and insurance costs. David escalated to increasingly aggressive emails, demanding to speak with the owners directly. Each was met with polite, formal responses reiterating the terms. Sarah began driving by the Victorian in the evenings, parking across the street where she could see their apartment but remain unnoticed. One night she watched them through the window, clearly arguing. Alexis gesturing wildly, David running his hands through his hair the way he did when stressed. The younger woman stormed out of the room. David stood alone by the window, looking out without seeing Sarah in her car below. She wanted my life, Sarah whispered to herself. She can pay for it now. The entertainment value of David's increasing desperation sustained Sarah through what would have been their anniversary month. She collected his communications like trophies, the legal threats empty, as her attorney confirmed. The appeals to decency, the carefully constructed explanations of why they deserved special consideration. We've been model tenants, he wrote in one particularly desperate email. We've invested in this community. 3 months and he considered himself invested. Sarah almost laughed. Meanwhile, she cultivated relationships with the other tenants who had received only reasonable increases and now viewed their mysterious landlord as comparatively generous. She learned that Alexis had been between jobs when they moved in, a detail David had omitted from their rental application. Now they were essentially living on one income with expenses designed for two. Through casual conversations with neighbors, Sarah gleaned that Alexis had expected a more luxurious lifestyle than David could actually provide. The younger woman had apparently thought she was getting a financially established older man, not realizing that David's apparent success had been partially built on Sarah's income and careful financial management. Now they were trapped. They couldn't afford the new rent, but moving would require first and last month's deposits they didn't have liquid. One evening, Sarah sat in her car across from the Victorian, watching David pace back and forth on his phone through the window. She didn't feel the vicious triumph she had expected. Instead, she felt something quieter, the satisfaction of watching natural consequences unfold. Some things aren't meant to be said, she thought, finally starting her car to drive home. Just enjoyed. David finally managed to get the property manager to agree to a face-to-face meeting. Sarah arranged to receive live updates from her position at a cafe across the street. She sipped her latte while reading the manager's text descriptions of David's increasingly desperate negotiation attempts, offers of property maintenance in exchange for lower rent, promises of perfect payment history, even personal appeals about financial hardship. The manager, well compensated for his role in this drama, held firm to the script Sarah had provided. Market forces determine pricing. The owners have investments to protect. When David demanded to speak directly with the owners, the manager explained they were overseas investors who purchased the building through an LLC and left all decisions to the management company. It wasn't entirely false. Sarah watched David emerge from the building, shoulders slumped in defeat. Alexis waited on the sidewalk, arms crossed, her expression visible even from a distance: frustration, disappointment, blame. Sarah could read the familiar body language of a relationship under financial strain. They argued briefly on the sidewalk before walking away in tense silence. Later that week, the first of the month arrived, and with it, the higher rent payment from Unit 3. It came at the last possible moment before late fees would apply, every penny accounted for. Sarah looked at the notification from her banking app and felt a grim satisfaction. They'd managed it this month, but she knew David well enough to understand the financial gymnastics this must have required. Credit card debt, borrowed money, robbing future Peter to pay present Paul. Every month, she murmured to herself, authorizing the manager's calmness. I collect interest on heartbreak. Summer arrived, bringing with it a heat wave that settled over the city like a heavy blanket. Sarah had the building's aging air conditioning system replaced, except in Unit 3, which received only minimal repairs that kept the system functioning just enough to meet legal requirements. She watched their relationship deteriorate through the fragments she collected. Complaints filed with the property manager, arguments overheard by neighbors, the increasing frequency with which Alexis left the apartment alone at night, returning in the early morning hours. Sarah's network of casual informants, the dog-walking neighbor, the chatty barista at the coffee shop near the Victorian, the property manager himself, provided regular updates that she pretended not to eagerly await. One particularly revealing moment came via text from the manager. Alexis had cornered him in the hallway, asking if any of the other more affordable units might be coming available soon. Trouble in paradise? He'd asked casually. Just exploring options, Alexis had replied with forced brightness. We love the building, but... She'd left the thought unfinished. Sarah smiled at this news, imagining the conversations happening behind closed doors. The younger woman had signed up for a successful older man, a comfortable life, an exciting affair. Instead, she'd gotten financial stress, an overheated apartment, and the fading thrill of forbidden love. Reality was setting in, the reality that Sarah had lived with for years. The knowledge that David was charming and passionate but financially irresponsible. That his promises often exceeded his follow-through. It's easy to steal someone's man, Sarah thought, watering the plants on her balcony in the evening heat. Harder to live his debt. The first payment lapse came in September, coinciding with what would have been Sarah and David's 16th anniversary. The check bounced, triggering the aggressive late fee structure Sarah had specifically designed for Unit 3. The property manager delivered a formal warning notice, printed on intimidating legal letterhead that Sarah had commissioned from her attorney. The document outlined the payment delinquency and the eviction process that would begin if not remedied within 5 days, along with the negative credit reporting that would follow. Sarah knew this would hit David particularly hard. Despite his financial carelessness, he prided himself on his perfect credit score, something she knew had already been damaged by their divorce and his recent lifestyle choices. The payment arrived on the 5th day, along with the late fees, but Sarah instructed the manager to send a formal probationary notice regardless. Any future late payments will result in immediate eviction proceedings, the letter stated coldly. Fall arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the 6-month anniversary of their divorce finalization. Sarah celebrated by having the building's heating system upgraded, except, of course, for Unit 3, which would receive only the legally required minimum maintenance. She knew David hated being cold even more than being hot. As the first chilly evenings descended on the city, she imagined him huddled under blankets, explaining to his increasingly disillusioned girlfriend why they couldn't afford to move somewhere with reliable heat. When you burn your bridges, Sarah thought, ordering an expensive bottle of wine to mark the occasion, don't expect a place to stay. Sarah was cooking dinner when her phone rang with David's number. She nearly dropped the knife she was holding. In the 7 months since he'd left, he hadn't called her directly. All communication had been through lawyers. She let it ring through to voicemail, heart pounding irrationally. His message was brief. Sarah, it's me. I know we haven't spoken, but I need to talk to you about something important. Please call me back. His voice lacked the confident edge she remembered. He sounded tired, defeated. She didn't call back. 3 days later, he tried again. This time she answered, keeping her voice neutral. David. A pause on his end, surprised that she'd actually picked up. Sarah. Thank you for answering. I've been wanting to talk to you. She said nothing, waiting. Things have been difficult lately, he continued into her silence. Financially, I mean. And I feel like I'm being targeted somehow. Our landlord is, it's like they have a personal vendetta. The irony almost made her laugh. Almost? That sounds challenging, she responded flatly. Is there something specific you need from me? He hesitated, clearly hoping for more engagement, some sign of the woman who had once rushed to solve his problems. I thought maybe we could talk. In person. Maybe coffee? She let the silence stretch between them, imagining him on the other end, probably stepping away from Alexis to make this call. No, David. I don't think that would be helpful for either of us. Take care. She hung up, turning back to the pasta sauce she'd been stirring. Closure is expensive, she murmured to the empty kitchen. They're still paying for it. Winter descended on the city with unusual ferocity. Record low temperatures strained the Victorian's heating system, and while the other units received prompt attention for any issues, complaints from Unit 3 were met with the legal minimum response time. Through her network of casual informants, Sarah learned that the cracks in David and Alexis's relationship had become chasms. The young woman had found a job but was considering a position in another city. David had been spotted at a local bar, drinking alone on multiple occasions. Their rent payment for December was late again, triggering another warning. This time Sarah instructed the manager to be less accommodating, beginning the formal eviction process even after they scrambled to pay. Just following procedures, the manager told David when he protested. The owners have a zero-tolerance policy now. A week before Christmas, Sarah received an unexpected email from Alexis herself. Somehow she'd obtained Sarah's contact information. "I know this is inappropriate," the message began, "but I feel I need to apologize to you. I didn't understand so many things. David isn't who I thought he was. I made a terrible mistake that hurt you, and now I'm paying for it in ways I never anticipated. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I recognized the pain I caused." Sarah read the message 3 times, complex emotions swirling. She never responded, but she did instruct the property manager to halt the eviction process, citing administrative reconsideration. On Christmas Eve, she drove past the Victorian and saw Alexis loading suitcases into her car while David watched from the doorway, not helping. "You can't build happiness on someone else's ruin," Sarah thought as she drove away. "It collapses eventually." January brought clarity and endings. Sarah received official notice from the property manager that the tenants in Unit 3 would not be renewing their lease, which expired at the end of the month. According to the manager, Alexis had already moved out and David was frantically looking for affordable accommodations he could manage on his single income. On the final day of January, Sarah parked across from the Victorian and watched as David carried boxes to his car under gray winter skies. He looked thinner, older. The confident posture she remembered now stooped with defeat. There was no sign of Alexis. Sarah had expected to feel triumphant watching this moment, the culmination of her carefully orchestrated revenge. Instead, she felt oddly hollow. This diminished man loading his belongings into a car that needed washing. He was no longer the husband who had betrayed her. He was just someone who had made poor choices and was living with their consequences. She didn't hate him anymore. She didn't feel much of anything. When he finally drove away from the Victorian, Sarah didn't follow. Instead, she walked through the empty apartment after the manager confirmed he had turned in the keys. The rooms echoed with absence, a few forgotten items, marks on the walls where pictures had hung, the lingering scent of David's cologne that had once been so familiar. She opened the windows despite the cold, letting the winter air sweep through the space, clearing away the last traces of her old life. It wasn't about revenge, she realized as she locked up the empty apartment. It was about remembering who I am. Spring returned to the city, bringing renewal in unexpected forms. Sarah interviewed potential tenants for Unit 3 personally, something she hadn't done with the other apartments in the building. She met Emily, a single mother of 2 returning to graduate school after a divorce that had left her financially strained but determined. Something in the woman's resilient spirit resonated with Sarah. "The rent listed seems high for the current market," Emily said hesitantly during their meeting, clearly prepared for disappointment but advocating for herself anyway. Sarah smiled. "The listing was incorrect. The actual rent is half that amount." Emily's expression of disbelief and relief stayed with Sarah for days afterward. She had the apartment professionally cleaned and upgraded the heating system before Emily and her children moved in. On moving day, Sarah brought coffee and pastries, introducing herself simply as the owner without explanation or history. She watched Emily's children run excitedly through the rooms that had once housed such unhappiness, their voices filling the space with new energy. In the months that followed, Sarah found herself becoming more involved with the building and its tenants. She approved improvements that the previous owners had deemed unnecessary, organized a community garden in the small backyard space, hosted holiday gatherings in the common area. The Victorian, once simply the instrument of her revenge, became something unexpected, a community she cared about, an investment in something beyond her pain. Let someone rebuild where something good can grow, she thought, watching Emily's children playing in the garden she had planted. The satisfaction was deeper than vengeance had ever been. 1 year to the day after David had left their marriage, Sarah sold her suburban house. She had delayed this final step, holding onto the property that had witnessed both the happiness and dissolution of her marriage. Now it felt right to let it go. She purchased a smaller place downtown, closer to her work and to the Victorian, which continued to thrive under her attentive ownership. On her first evening in the new home, she opened a bottle of wine and sat on her balcony overlooking the city lights. She thought about David, wondering briefly where he had landed. According to mutual friends, he and Alexis had officially separated months ago. He had moved to a smaller city where the cost of living was lower. There was a time when such information would have consumed her, but now it felt like news about a distant acquaintance, mildly interesting but ultimately unimportant to her daily life. The wine tasted rich and complex on her tongue. The city hummed below. Her phone contained texts from new friends, including Emily and other tenants who had become part of her expanded world. Sarah breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the past year, the betrayal, the calculated revenge, the unexpected rebuilding, settle into something resembling peace. Not the absence of pain, but its transformation into hard-earned wisdom. She had survived. More than survived, she had reclaimed herself from the ashes of a relationship that had tried to diminish her. This wasn't a revenge story, she whispered to the night sky, raising her glass in a silent toast to herself. It was a rebirth. If you enjoyed this story of empowerment and justice, please like this video to help others find it too. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience and triumph. Share with someone who needs to remember their own strength today. And please comment below with what you would have done in Sarah's situation. Would you have chosen revenge or taken a different path? Your perspective matters to our storytelling community.